So my name is Alex Nguyen. I'm an undergraduate student in the Earth Science and Astronomy departments at Vassar College. First and foremost, I'm extremely grateful to have worked on this project about linking subsurface complexity and ecohydrologic processes in semi-arid forests with Dr. Holly Barnard and Ethan Burns this summer. So today I will be let me change the slide there real quick. Today, I will provide some background about transpiration and rock moisture. I will talk about the relevance to our work, and then I'll cover our study site and methods, the results from our analysis, and finally, I'll discuss the implications and possible extensions of our work. And then there'll also be time for questions as well. So trees drop water from subsurface storage, whether that be from soil moisture or rock moisture, which is moisture stored in the fractured bedrock. This subsurface water storage is crucial for tree growth. With a warming climate where more frequent and extreme droughts have become increasingly prevalent, it's more important to understand how and at what rate water is being used by trees and where that water is being stored and coming from. And we don't fully understand how these mechanisms occur in semi-arid forests. And similarly, we don't understand how subsurface rock complexity affects water availability. So the objective of this project is to better understand how subsurface water storage affects transpiration in lodgepole and ponderosa pine trees in a semi-arid forest over space and time. And then this graphic right here shows the layers of soil, saprolite, and weathered and fractured bedrock, as well as the moisture contained in those layers and how this contributes to the transpiration in the trees above. So notice how the soil moisture is relatively consistent underneath the two trees. However, there's more rock moisture underneath the larger tree, so that tree grows larger. And then this could happen on a much larger scale as well. So to understand what we're measuring, that being transpiration, we have to know a little bit about it, right? So transpiration refers to how water moves through plants. And looking at this diagram, we can see that water moves up through the stem by the xylem. And then that water is, the water that is unused is evaporated at the surface of the leaves by the stomata. So now that we know a little bit about transpiration, we can talk about the subsurface water storage, and that being soil moisture and rock moisture. So rock moisture is defined as water stored in the bedrock zone of the subsurface beneath the thin soil layer. And we understand that rock moisture is separate from soil moisture in that it encompasses weathered and fractured bedrock, not only the thin soils. So we have to ask ourselves, why do we care about rock moisture? While previous research has investigated soil moisture effects on transpiration, rock moisture's effects on transpiration are not fully understood. So it has become increasingly important to determine how rock moisture can mitigate stress in plants, whether that be from rainfall variability or drought, as our climate continues to change. Our research aims to address the relative importance of rock moisture, which we believe impacts water movement through ecosystems, including our semi-arid forest study environment. And then this graphic shows stratigraphically where rock moisture would be in relation to soil, groundwater storage, and bedrock as well. So our study site is in the Gordon Gulch catchment near Boulder, Colorado, and our site is roughly 2.7 square kilometers and ranges in elevation from 2,600 meters to 2,740 meters. In Gordon Gulch, there is variability in vegetation distribution, depth of weathered rock, and snowpack when comparing southern and northern slopes. So for example, north-facing slopes retain more snow than south-facing slopes due to the sun's low position in the sky during winter months. And then the two plots considered in the study are Gordon Gulch 210, the north-facing, and then Gordon Gulch 213, the south-facing. So plot 210, they had 28 trees counted, all of which were lodgepole pine trees. And in 213, there were 13 trees counted, and there was a mix of lodgepole and ponderosa pine trees. And in each of the sites, we had 8 of the trees fitted with our sap flow sensors to measure transpiration rates in the trees. Now, we can talk a little bit about seismic data and seismic lines. So we used seismic line data from a previous study in proximity to our site. And then this seismic line data was used to interpret the amount of subsurface, weathered, and fractured rock, and thus potential for rock moisture. Now, if we look at the image on the top right, we can see that the seismic refraction surveys were conducted by having these geophones here record the velocities at which seismic waves bounce off of rock. And from these velocities, we can interpret subsurface structure in terms of presence of fractured and weathered rock and its depth as well. In the bottom image, we can see how the seismic line image represents possible stratigraphic layers underneath the ocean in this case. So we qualitatively analyzed and interpreted the previous images from the previous study in relation to possible rock moisture storage. Now, historic sap flow data for the transpiration rates, we used that and we calculated these transpiration rates using constant heat pull sap flow methods as we see in this graphic. So the sensors were installed at each plot and measured sap flux in order to calculate water movement in the sapwood of a tree. At our plots, measurements were taken every 30 minutes from mid-June until September 2014. Furthermore, soil moisture data was used to understand subsurface water content as well. So soil moisture data was collected using hydroprobe soil moisture sensors at 10 centimeters and 30 centimeter depths every 30 minutes, along with the transpiration rates. So after running through the calculations, we found that plot 210 transpired around 28 millimeters, and then it received a total of rain of around 27 millimeters. It also had lower soil moisture at 10 centimeter depths, and then had the same soil moisture at 30 centimeter depths compared to plot 213. Plot 213, on the other hand, transpired around 22 millimeters, received 53 millimeters of rain, and had higher soil moisture at 10 centimeter depth, and then again had the same at 30 centimeter depth. So something important to notice here is that plot 210 transpired around 25% total more transpiration than plot 213, as we can see in this table. So while plot 210 showed more transpiration during this period, as we see here, it had consistently, plot 213 had consistently higher soil moisture at 10 centimeter depths, and we can see that in this plot as well. And it also received quite a bit more rain than plot 210 comparatively. Furthermore, we can sort of see that plot 210 has more responsiveness to rain events, as we can see in its soil moisture data, where we see more peaks where rain events would be compared to plot 213, which is somewhat interesting. Again, we have to realize that plot 213 received more rain than plot 210. So one question would be that why was plot 210 having more total transpiration when its total rain and soil moisture were lower than plot 213? So one possible explanation could be a difference in atmospheric drivers, which we could deduce from vapor pressure deficit. However, looking at this plot of the deficits, we can see that they're relatively similar. So we can sort of say that the atmospheric drivers are similar between the two sites, as they are relatively close in location as well. So now that we took out the atmospheric drivers explanation, maybe it's rock moisture. So we can use seismic line images to interpret this. So using the local seismic line images, we get a very rough idea as to what the subsurface may look like near these plots. Upon analysis of the lines close to our plots, that being line 24 near plot 210, the one with more transpiration, and line 21 near plot 213, the one with less transpiration, we can make hypotheses as to how subsurface complexity, as we see here, affects water availability. So something to notice here is that the scales are different in these two plots. So one box here represents 2 meters, while one box here represents 1 meter. So looking at these lines, we see that plot 210 has around 10 meters of fractured bedrock, because we're going down to where it starts to get a little bit blue, where the velocities are higher, and then that's where we have more bedrock compared to above it, where we would have fractured bedrock. And then on the other hand, we see that plot 213 has around 5 meters. So we can't exactly say that plot 210 would be able to hold twice as much rock moisture than plot 213, but we can sort of hypothesize that 210 has more storage in that deep subsurface than 213. So this possible increased storage at 210 could explain why its transpiration rates are higher than 213, despite 210 having less soil moisture and rainfall. So it's possible that this depth of fractured rock sort of it substitutes for its lack of total rain and soil moisture at those compared to plot 213. So something of note here is that the total transpiration at these plots, around 20 to 30 millimeters of rain total over the period, is extremely lower than expected values. Considering how this area receives around 500 millimeters of precipitation a year, our transpiration rates are about just a little bit under an order of magnitude lower than what would be expected. Now, a possible explanation for these lower than average rates is that Colorado received an extreme drought in the year of 2013, as we can see in this plot here. And then looking at this plot, we can see that the scale here is from less extreme droughts to more extreme droughts, from yellow to darker color. And then on this scale, we have its percentage of the state covered. So at this point, we had a very extreme drought, and then our data was collected in 2014. So we could see how this has possible effects. So these powerful droughts have long-lasting effects on water storage into the leading months of the year, as we see. So it's possible that this drought may have driven the very low transpiration rates seen during the summer of 2014. Now, in conclusion, we found that rock moisture can potentially mitigate the stress undergone by plants due to drought and warming temperatures with our changing climate. Furthermore, rock moisture can possibly explain higher transpiration rates where soil moisture and total rainfall is lower, as we saw in those seismic line images. And finally, we see that drought may affect transpiration and vegetation in the months and seasons after an extreme drought. Now, we have to ask ourselves, like, why should I care? It is our hope that our work sheds light on the importance of considering rock moisture and ecohydrologic budgets of an ecosystem, as we demonstrated how rock moisture may affect tree growth and transpiration, as well as water availability. Rock moisture remains relatively understudied and not fully understood, and some further work would be extending to other water limited environments like deserts and high altitude forests. And some current work being done is looking at if certain tree species are more reliant on rock moisture. I foresee that rock moisture will continue to be further studied and its effects on ecosystem will be more understood with time. I'd like to thank Dr. Holly Barnard, Ethan Burns, and Eric Smith for helping me out with this project. As well as that, I'd like to thank the NSF, NASA Gauge, UNAVCO, RESESS, and CO Boulder for providing this invaluable research experience and increasing diversity in the geosciences. Along with that, I have a land acknowledgement for the people's land we did our research on. Thank you very much.
Great job, Alex. Okay, we will now take any questions.
I have a question for Alex.
Yeah.
Alex, that was an awesome presentation. Really nice work on your project. I was curious about one of the things that was interesting about your data set was that you saw more rain, but also more soil moisture on your one. Is it possible that there's a soil story here too, besides a rock moisture story? Is it possible that there's something about the connectivity of maybe the soils on these hill slopes that might also be deriving what you're seeing in transpiration? Or do you think the trees root more deeply and consequently take their water from a deeper source?
That's an interesting point. I'm not quite too sure, to be honest. Something of note is that it's possible that our total rainfall data sets might have been mixed up with different locations within that catchment. So it's sort of surprising to us that one plot received around 20 or so millimeters of rain, while the other plot received around like 50 or so millimeters of rain. Well, there's, not that much of a distance between the two, but I could see that, it's possible that the trees are deeper rooted. So that may have an effect on that too.
Actually, you just made me think of another question. Is the way the rainfall measured, is it underneath the tree canopy? So is it possible that it's an interception issue for those?
Yeah, so it's we aren't exactly sure if the sensors or how it was measured was under the canopy or not, but that could definitely affect the total, because then that would be less, right? So that would be something to look into if we can figure out how those sensors were set up in the past.
Really nice work, Alex.
Thanks.
Okay, Lon, I believe you were first.
Thanks, really enjoyed your talk, Alex. So you were talking about further research in other settings, but you also mentioned that your data came a year after a drought. and that you only measured it over the summer season, what would be your steps moving forward in this particular area instead of moving to, say, different vegetation types and other areas?
I would say doing more research, looking at what the effects of rock moisture would be in terms of its like source and inputs. And that's what some of the research that Ethan Burns is doing. And then also using sort of different methods to probe the subsurface. And this could be done in our catchment too, using like neutron probe surveys and stuff like that. That's what Ethan Burns is doing. So I think that's a good step forward in looking at the sort of area instead of moving to a different environment.
Great, thank you.
Eva, you can go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. I really enjoyed your presentation. I was wondering if you have an understanding of the reasons that the depth of the fractured bedrock changes throughout the area. Would that have a relationship at all with the amount of moisture it receives, or the snow, like a freeze thaw impact or anything like that?
I'm not too sure of why there is the change of depth. That would be something to ask my research mentor, Dr. Holly Barnard, but I think it's possible that slope may have an effect. And then also with the depth, I guess our idea is that with less depth of that fractured bedrock, we would have less moisture stored in that amount. But yeah, I'm not sure as to why the depth is different on the varying hill slopes. It might have something to do with aspect or just the general region that we're looking at.
Okay, awesome. Thanks.
Yeah.